Welcome to Cases and Concepts Conversations, where we at the law firm of Romanucci and Blandon are going to talk a bit about the type of law that we do, the people we do it for, and the referring attorneys we do it with. Founding partner Antonio Romanucci and I are going to talk about mass tragedies today, a very specific type of personal injury law. Tony, what does a mass tragedy mean to you in the law firm?
Hello, Jen. Thanks for having me on today. So, a mass tragedy is much different than what a class action is. Many people, confuse a class action with mass tragedy. So, when we're talking about a mass tragedy, unfortunately, you think of airplane crash as being one of them, a train collision being another one, or, for example, an environmental disaster where, there's a chemical leak or there's something in the air that pollutes and causes sickness to many, many people. That is more like a mass action or mass disaster, and I think we'll talk about the differences between mass and class. Hopefully, you ask me that a little bit later and we get to talk about that.
We will get into that. I'd like to talk for a little bit about the firm's response when we might see something on the news or hear about an unfortunate tragedy. What does that do to you, and what do you activate within the firm?
Well, first thing you have to know is that someone like myself, who is a news junkie, who is always either watching the news or reading about the news, I'm always on the lookout for something where we can help people. Just yesterday, there was major tragedy that was averted at Midway when that Southwest Airlines plane was landing from Omaha, and there was a private plane that crossed in its path. And we saw that Southwest Airlines pilot react very quickly and do a go around, literally probably 1 to 2 seconds before there would have been a tragedy. So we didn't have to think about what we were going to do there, but certainly I was thinking about the safety issues because runway incursions are a very serious matter, something that has to be taken very seriously by not only us as passengers, but by our government because the FAA typically controls all the ground movements of airplanes. So we're looking to see how can this not make sure this doesn't happen again? So when something does happen, we are always thinking about how can we make it safer. Now, in the event that this would have been a disaster, a tragedy, then we're looking to see what happened so that we can have some answers when people do call us.
And let's take the aviation example a bit further. Earlier in February 2025, Delta Airlines had a plane with a crash landing in Toronto.
Yes.
What is your response from the firm in the first 24 hours, even in the first several days? What type of activities does that trigger in the legal team?
Well, I'm not like anybody else. When I see a disaster like that happen, the first thing that you think of, especially with Delta Connection, thank goodness everyone lived. And so, I mean, I have the same reaction. You have this, shock and awe type of reaction. And then once that passes, well, then we know our lawyerly instincts kick in. We start looking at the video. You don't always have video of these types of incidents. So when there is, we try and start digesting it and dissecting it at the same time. Looking at the plane's angle of attack when it was landing, that it was imbalanced. And, luckily in Delta Connections case, the wing broke off. Had that wing not broken off and maybe landed underneath the plane, would have been a very different outcome. So we're looking at all the different angles of everything that happened so that when we get called, we have answers, at least probable answers, as opposed to exactly what happened.
And I've heard you say in aviation at least two things have to go wrong. Stand
Yes.
by that statement?
Oh, I stand by that statement, and I think all the experts will agree. It is extremely rare when you have only one cause for an airplane disaster. Typically, there are two things that have had to go wrong in order for something bad to happen. Not that one thing can't be the sole cause, but very typically, especially with airlines and airplanes, the mechanical and the structural parts, there's what's called redundancies. There's always something, there's a backup, and sometimes there's a backup to the backup. And the same thing with piloting and air traffic control. They're just not repeating themselves because they want to hear themselves talk. That's redundancy right there. So when they say Roger, check, and they repeat the command, it's because there's a redundancy. You have to make sure that you heard it correctly, and there has to be a positive response to it.
Now, not all mass tragedies are the same. The firm does a lot of work in other areas too, mass shootings or mass
Sure.
disasters like what
Yes.
happened in New Orleans on Bourbon Street on New Year's Day. Does the type of incident change the reaction within the law firm? Different people activated, different process, different research.
Well, it does activate different people in the firm because we're fortunate to have enough attorneys here where we have dedicated teams. So we do have an aviation team. We do have a medical malpractice team. We do have a premises liability team. We have a civil rights team, et cetera. So it does activate different parts of the firm, just like you're activating a different muscle if you're picking something up as opposed to kicking something. So when New Orleans happened, not only does it activate our communications department, but it activates the premises liability department. It typically also activates either Stephen Blandon or myself to oversee that sort of, especially such a mass tragic incident.
Let's go back to your mass and class question. Let's talk about the difference. I think people in the public assume anytime more than two or three people are involved, it's a class action. But there is a real significant difference between those terms. Talk that through.
Sure. So, in order for something to be a class action, you have to satisfy certain requirements. For example, numerosity, commonality,
Now, what are those two
superiority.
typical people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of big words, lawyerly words, and I know I don't want to bog us down, but for example, numerosity means exactly that. You have to have enough people to qualify for a class action. And that can differ in some jurisdictions, but typically you need about a good dozen or so to qualify as a class action. But many times you see class actions in the thousands or maybe tens of thousands. The best analogy I could come up with regarding the difference between class action and mass action really centers on one of the qualifications is commonality. And it means just that. If all of the damages or the harm and loss is common to everybody, then it's a class action.
Like if an electric bill gypped consumers out of the same amount on their bill.
Sure.
Okay.
A very good example of a class action is what's called a TCPA case, Telephone Communication Privacy Act. And you'll know what I'm talking about with a robocall. So a robocall, if it's unwanted and it goes to 1,000 people, that's a class because it's an annoying call and everybody suffers the same type of harm. So a class action is when a quarterback is trying to win the game for the whole team. A mass case, a mass action is when everybody's on the same team, but they're all trying to score a touchdown at the same time. Everybody's individualized in a mass action. Nobody is individualized in a class action.
That makes sense. Now, in a lot of these mass tragedy cases, we will partner with other firms. How does
Yeah,
that happen? Is it something happens out of town and people are seeking partners? What are those conversations like?
absolutely. I mean, we sometimes we seek out partners, or sometimes other firms seek us out to partner with them. And the reason is solely based typically on expertise. We have a very dedicated expertise in certain areas of the law. So firms will want us to collaborate with them and also partner with them because a bigger team makes a stronger team. And that's why typically you see law firms partner up with other firms who have a very, very specialized knowledge in the area of law that deals with this particular tragic event because it makes us better.
Let's talk about other justice. Certainly, Romanucci and Blandon specializes in civil justice, but in these mass events, there are often other types of justice: criminal justice, legislative justice. Do you get involved in those pieces as well?
As our firm has grown and matured, Jen, I mean, it was inevitable that we also took a lead in other areas of justice. Of course, when a client comes to us, our first and foremost obligation and job for them is civil justice. But many times they also ask us to help them in other areas of justice. Like you said, in the criminal field, many of our clients were victims of a crime, but there is also somebody else to sue in that case. So we have those two parallel systems going on at the same time. But then there's also the legislative field. So many, and you know this, so many of our clients come and they say, how can we stop this from happening again? And we say, well, literally, let's call our legislator. Let's call our Senate or congressional bodies and let's see if we can make a difference that way. And I think we've done a pretty good job across the country at making a lot of laws in a lot of different states for the benefit of our clients.
My last question for you is this seems like a very busy and active uh, practice area and one that other firms may have an interest in getting into. Are you open to helping them understand that? What should someone do if they have a case or they have some questions? How do you
Well,
suggest they call?
I mean, I always say if you're interested in what we're doing, let us try and help you because the more better lawyers we have in one particular area, the stronger we get. And this is something that you've heard me say before when it comes to our litigation against the gun manufacturers in this country. Not because we are trying to shut down the Second Amendment, but because we are trying to shut down weapons of mass destruction. These assault weapons with high capacity magazines that can shoot off one round, in less than a second and as fast as you can change a clip, just like we know has happened in some of our local areas and killed many people and injured so many others. That's what we're trying to do. So if you're interested in helping out, well, we're interested in helping you so we can all help each other. My good friend the other day, and then I know you have to go, but rising tides raise all ships.
Indeed. Thank you. And should you have any questions about mass tragedy law or any specific questions for Tony or the firm, certainly please feel free to reach out at info@rblaw.net or give us a call, 312-458-1000. Thank you, and thank you.
Thanks, Jen.